All right, good evening, everybody.
So, how's the movie star? Now I'm going to take one person.
So, for the members of the committee, there is the attendance coming around, and if you haven't yet got your name on there, please do that. We have that record. I did distribute a number of the agendas around the table, and I put some on the heater for anyone else that maybe wants to take a look at the agenda for tonight. Let's do a quick review of the agenda. We have minutes from our last meeting in December. And then we have our usual working group update, and then we have a couple of design updates, both interior and exterior. John Lemieux is going to give us a preview of the all-important 3011 form, which really gets into how costs are calculated based on what's reimbursed and what isn't. Right? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some next steps that are going to be happening throughout this month and into February. So I distributed the minutes with the invitation to this meeting. So hopefully you had a chance to look at those. Anybody want to make a motion to approve the 12/5/2018 minutes?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments or discussion? Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Great. Thank you. All right, so that takes us into new business. So our working group update, we continue to meet on Thursday mornings. Members of the design team, members of the OPM, Dr. B, myself, Greg Haddon, Greg LeBrecq, and we're really sort of working through a lot of the nuts and bolts that will go into the SD submission. So just like we did our PDP submission, and then we did our PSR submission, we have another giant book that we're putting together that will be the schematic design submission. So there's a lot of nuts and bolts that go into that, as well as kind of the things that we're presenting at the building committee meetings, kind of going through those and discussing those ahead of time as well. And, it's almost like the working group kind of does some processing and sort of sense making of that, giving feedback to the design team, and then brings it to this group, again, for another level of sort of feedback. So often what you see here, we've kind of talked about and maybe tweaked a little bit prior to doing it. There's a lot of props on the table that are going to become a part of the conversation, particularly in the exterior part of that. So I'm going to turn things over to Giovanna. We're going to go interior first, I guess, which is out of order, but we're going to go interior first, then we're going to go exterior. So you all know Giovanna Chason from Norwood here, and go ahead.
Hello. Thanks for having us again. So tonight we're going to start with interior and then we're going to move out. And I don't know if you've heard us talk about the building as kind of a series of buildings stitched together by a common thread. And that's certainly how we talk about it in the office. And so that's been our driving overall design concept. And what we want to talk about today is what does the interior of that thread look like, and how does that it's kind of a main street for the students. We're going to talk a little bit about the classroom wing and all the different sizes, different elements of a typical classroom wing. Then we're going to just go into some overarching design concepts and ideas, and we're going to end with the interior rendering of the dining commons. And from there, we'll move to exterior. So when we look at kind of the inside of the building, what we've done is stacked the upper floor onto the lower level. And there's this main street that kind of runs through that thread, and that's kind of the main commons for the students. And what we want to stress is this connection between the upper level and the lower level. The dining commons is spread out throughout those two levels, as well as the library being spread out on the upper level, but it's kind of semi-open and semi-closed. So this common stitch, this common thread that runs down through the building would have a very common look, and so we want to stress that would feel very uniform. Also, in talking about budget and how do we work with the budget that we have, this would be the jewel box of the building. This would be where we would spend, the finishes would be at a little bit higher level than in the classroom wings. We would focus more on durability, still nice, still warm, cleanable, but not as higher end, I guess, if you will. And that's not really the right word, but I think we have a little bit more of a flash in this space than we do in all the other spaces, if that makes sense. In this diagram, you can see the dining commons and the two-story volume, and we'll look at a rendering of that to help a little bit.
So I think we just orient people to the front doors and the major pieces that we're presenting.
So this is kind of that center piece of the building with the admin block as kind of the anchor, and then you have the dining commons to one side with an entrance on that side. We're calling it the high school entrance, and then the middle school entrance on the lower side. A slight modification that we recently made is we made that middle school entrance 2 sets of doors. And so thinking for sporting events, it would really be easier to get people in and out of those doors there. And then the main dining commons, the servery is at the far end. And then as you come down, kind of that connective tissue, there's the open dining commons with the auditorium adjacent there. And then keep going and go past the nurse, and then the secondary dining commons area, and then it links all the way down to the gym.
Will that pigeonhole the kids, like, into the, coming in and out, trying to get their food?
So we've made a few changes. The stair was a much larger stair, and so we were worried that that was going to be tight in that back area that we were talking about. Is this kind of this zone?
Yeah, if that's where they're getting their food.
Right, so we have made it much larger, and the stair you can circulate all the way around. So it's not that you go down one little corridor, you can go on any side of the stair.
And the servery itself is conceived of as a scramble servery, not like this where it's just a series of lines. So imagine going into this without any line. People are just going to whatever station they need to get to and then immediately going to a point of sale location. So we've tried to make it as open as humanly possible in that particular location.
I think that question though, Dina, that you asked is a good one, because it was one of the big discussions we had as a team looking at, I presented before, this notion of that wide heller upstairs. And I think after a lot of discussion and kind of like, wrestling with that, I think ultimately we just decided we didn't have enough room and the geometry wasn't quite right to be able to allow us to do that. We really liked the idea behind it, but sometimes, you've got to make those decisions that we feel, in terms of functionality of that space. I think it just works better. That was specifically to address that question, like John said.
Then this diagram represents a typical classroom wing, and what we've done here is in any typical wing, we've tried to mix a series of different types of spaces. So we have some smaller classrooms, some larger classrooms. Here at the end, we have 1,000 square foot and a 900 square foot classroom with a removable wall. So manually you can flip and fold the panels all up against one wall and make it a super large classroom to do shared activities in. We also have, again, another one of our threads is this shared extended learning area. And so we have a portion of that that's closed with glass and a portion of that that's open. The idea there is that's really going to be a break in the corridor. It's going to allow light in, and it's for any sort of breakout activities that the students can imagine, stuff that we probably didn't even question. But we would have a variety of different technology. One thought is, one side might have more technology, whereas the other might be low tech. And then in the conference room, there would be some technology, the small group room. Also embedded in the classroom wing would be any sort of special education classes. There's not a special education area. They're all embedded within the classroom, up and down the corridors. And in the corridors as well. On this floor, you're seeing the Da Vinci studio. On upper levels, it might be the science rooms. So again, it's that integration of all the courses. And with that said, the exception would be art and music. Music especially because acoustically they kind of need to be separate, and art has so many resources that it makes sense for them to be shared in one common area so that they can share all their resources. So that is in a little bit of a separate area. But other than those two programs, everything is mixed. And the idea here is that the teachers would have a teacher planning room, so that would be their home base. And the classrooms you would select a classroom based on what you were teaching that day, week, semester. And so that the teachers,
Would you comment on where the science rooms are?
Yep, so this is only a diagram of the first floor. The science rooms are in this location where you see Da Vinci Studio and embedded SPED on the upper levels. And then in the other wings, there's science rooms as well. So every wing gets at least one science room.
Is that storage at the end of next to the Da Vinci Studio at the end of the hallway there? Is that what that is?
That
area?
is group toilet rooms.
Oh, they're bathrooms,
The Da
okay.
Vinci Studio does have its own storage.
Okay, no, I just didn't know what that extension was. Okay, bathrooms, all right.
So that teacher planning room looks not that large. Is there one of those in each wing? And is there some kind of plan for the teachers in terms of usage for those rooms, storage for their materials? I know that a lot of them use digital materials, but when you're doing planning, some people still like to, spread out on your table. That wouldn't allow for that for like 5 teachers.
So what we've allowed for in this space is when you first walk in, there's a little small kitchenette space, so a sink, an under cabinet, refrigerator, space to hang coats. Then there is what we're calling a tutoring space. A lot of the teachers said that they would love a spot that they could go and close the door, either with a student or make a private phone call or just have a moment of quiet. So we have a small tutoring space. It's not very luxurious in size. It's about 70 square feet. But it's perfect for one-on-one. We purposely didn't make it large because we didn't want people to kind of take it over. And then in the teacher planning room proper, yes, there is one of these suites in every.
Oh, that whole thing behind that is also the teacher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This whole block here is the teacher planning.
Well, the arrow is pointing.
That must
Captain Literal.
That must be the kitchenette.
One little spot. You get.
That's really
So what's
small.
planned for right now is every teacher to get at least a 5-foot desk and then a large shared table in the middle. And then we often put some like bookshelves or storage underneath the table for miscellaneous supplies.
So it's kind of like the, when we went towards Situate?
Yes, that's
what it
exactly.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you allotted space for service providers like speech, OT, PT, for them? Because I know working in a public school, a lot of times people are kind of fighting for space, competing. It's nice for those service providers to know that they have a spot to service children.
So OTPT has its own room that is dedicated to them, and they have dedicated workstations within that room. Speech also has its own office that is just their office. We've sat with all of the special educators and gone through their spaces. We have a number, there's a space for connections, a space for therapeutic processing, literacy-based. Jason, I'm forgetting a bunch, you know them all.
Yeah, so for example,
Yeah.
this is a resource room where you have 3, of these professionals sharing a single space. Each one of them would have their own space in a wing of the building in this design.
So I do have a quick question. So Jonathan, this seems to be a radical change. I know we saw this, Brad, I'm not trying to catch you. We saw this in one of the field trips. But this is a radical change from your current model, right?
Radical in what way?
Just having shared classrooms and just the whole way of teaching high school kids. This setup that we're proposing is nothing like the setup we have here.
Yeah, I would have changed how Giovanna described it a little bit in the sense of that every day a teacher will pick the space they're going to use based on what they're going to teach that day. I don't envision it working that way. I envision that there will be more teachers floating, not having the same room every period every day than we have right now. But I would still think that probably the majority of teachers are still going to teach most of their stuff in the same place. But there is a lot more, like flexibility is really the core of like all of this design. So, even the science rooms, which are like when it's called a science room, the MSBA says it has to have this stuff in it. Even the science rooms, everything's movable. So I could teach a social studies class in a science room because I can move furniture around and I can do the discussions that I want to do. So the spaces are really flexible, and we have a variety of them. And again, I think the majority of people are gonna, for the most part, I'm gonna teach most of my classes in this area, but there is gonna be that flexibility. One of the things that's built into this design is growth, right? Because that's one of the concerns that a lot of people have voiced. It's like, we have to plan for the building to be a certain square footage based on our enrollment in projection. And so the whole, you build it and then all of a sudden people show up. So there is there is a buffer zone in there, which is the utilization of our classes. So right now we use most of our classes 5 out of 7, and we've designed this building the same way. And when we get that increase in enrollment, we can go to the 6 out of 7, or maybe some classes would be used 7 out of 7. And in that model, people will be moving quite a bit more than they are right now. But I think upon move-in and settling in, I think we're going to be similar usage to how we have it right now. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It seems like this makes it also a lot easier for some of the interdisciplinary work that I think people are trying to do, but in the current building is more challenging.
No doubt.
And this is built
It does provide a lot of those opportunities.
designed
The teacher
to-
planning
right.
areas will put multiple disciplines all in the same place, doing that prep and planning and rubbing shoulders with each other.
I mean, and even the ability to join the rooms. Like if that's normally my room and that's normally Joanna's room, and we are teaching something together, we can just open up the wall instead of having to arrange with someone to borrow their bigger room.
And so as Jonathan was saying, one of the key principles here is flexibility. And we're trying to position the design to say, yes, you can if you want to, rather than have the building dictate what you must do.
Question, everybody?
So if I'm planning a lesson on a whiteboard and I'm in a English room, but for my 5th period class, I'm scheduled in a science room, is that something that's going to accommodate my lesson plan? In other words, are we going to find that kind of technology everywhere?
Yeah, so the idea here is that we're going more and more digital, right? I don't think we're ever going to be paperless, but we're going more and more digital. We're becoming a Google district. A lot of teachers are doing all their stuff, all their files are in that sense. So the idea here would be no matter what room you're in, you're going to be able to log in to a keyboard that will, light up whatever board is in that room, and then you'll be able to pull up all your stuff.
Okay.
So no matter where you are. And as Giovanna and Jason like to say, because people say, oh, does that mean we're going to have projectors mounted on the classrooms? By the time we go to buy the technology, it might not even exist right now. So there's so much that's going on with these mounted boards and digital display and being able to display it's really exciting. So that's going to be huge.
But every instructional space will have that capability.
Whether it's a board like this, on the wall that, again, has a little, has a keyboard that you just log in, and then Mr. Hodges, all your files are right there, and you just grab what you need.
What we often do in situations like this is we provide a kind of a teacher's caddy up by whatever it is, whatever the digital display is. And in every classroom, those house the same thing. So the markers, the dry erase, all the boards, everything, so that a teacher can come, know exactly what to expect in that space, and just plug and play and go. Also, we recently had a conversation with our technology consultant, and it was exactly that conversation about consistency. We want to be consistent between all the classrooms so that you're not getting somewhere and spending 20 minutes trying to figure out how to turn the TV on. So, all great questions.
Just one other piece. We went ahead and spoken to several schools 712s who were separate buildings came into one, and their space, they had to initially merge. So instead of being at 70% usage, they were up at the 90%. And they all agreed that first year, it's a little bit challenging because for decades, you've been in your classroom and that's been your classroom. But they all agreed that it was, that the teaching space was far more conducive to them collaborating, and they didn't mind so much when they had to leave their room and go out because it was something that was close. It wasn't like they were traveling way down to a different part of the building. But it took time. It took time for them to adjust that. And I don't know that we may not get to that point for 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 years, who knows. But it's good to know that if that does come up, that at least we've talked to people who've been through that process, and it won't be something that will be immediate smack in the face. But when it does happen, it'll take some time and it'll work itself out.
Does all the teachers moving around reduce the amount of moving around the students too? Is that a trade-off, or is everybody floating around?
Yeah, I think everybody's still floating around. But really, as Jason was saying, we're designing the building in a way to give you options, how you operate the building. There could be a million different ways as to how that happens. So that's really, we're hoping to provide you the tools to set up the school day, how it works best for everybody to inhabit.
And just to be clear, we're not designing the building to force teachers to move. There are enough classrooms and science spaces and special education spaces that on opening day you can operate the course load and the daily schedule that you have today and have, for the most part, everybody have their own space. We're designing in some of these features so that if the educational model changes or the population grows, you have the flexibility to accommodate those things without significant renovations or changes to the physical facility itself.
Okay. So when we start to look at designing the space, one tool that we do is we start to look at precedents and other spaces. From an interiors perspective, we take cues from what we're doing on the exterior. We've talked to students, we've been to visioning sessions, talked to faculty and community members, and we've gotten the notion that what we're looking for is a timeless building that's still really warm and inviting, but easy to maintain, or maintainable. So taking all of those things and putting them together, one element that we see being a really nice element is in that main dining space, in that central connective tissue. We would really love to see the introduction of warm wood, and we're proposing doing that in wood deck, wood beams, and wood columns. And this would be kind of the framework for then everything else in it. I like to describe it that would be kind of the heavy and the solid, and then everything else in the space would be really light and transparent. So these are just a couple examples of some glulam beams. These would actually be structural members. The ceiling would be the structural deck. The important thing to see here is when you have a structural deck, everything is surface mount. So you will see the surface mounted conduits, you will see pipes, you will see things. It's our job to have them be as neat and clean as possible, but they will be there. So when you look at the rendering, you're like, wow, that's a really clean ceiling. It's a drawing. And we're working through all of that. In a space like this, we are going to have to pay really close attention to acoustics, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but that is something that we are aware of. We love the simplicity of these images. There's not a lot of different materials. There's wood, there's some black steel, there's the concrete floor, there's the glass, and the students' artwork, that is the sparkle. Everything else is kind of a nice backdrop to the students and their work. When we talk a little bit more about materials, we are proposing that the ground floor kind of thread space is a polished concrete. Moving to the upper levels into the classroom wings, we would probably go to a linoleum. That seems to work really well. It's easy to maintain, easy to keep clean, and meets a good price point. We would also be talking about some tiled surfaces on the wall and playing with different scales, but keeping the walls a little bit of a warmer color and trying to really create a warm environment. We talked a little bit about the wood beams and the wrought iron. We would also introduce some nice tall glass that lets you see directly outside, and then some glass railings. So a really simple palette, a yellow image in the middle. We are currently talking about some super graphics, some large graphics up high, but also keeping those in a subtle tone and more of a tone on tone image. So as we start to explore what those are, the idea again is to keep the backdrop simple, timeless, and elegant, and then the kids are kind of the punch. We have 2 connecting stairs in that main space, one from the dining commons up and one from the lower dining commons up to the library. And as I was saying, if the wood is kind of this big, heavy structure, we would like to see the stair be a lighter element, so we're playing with glass risers. So here you can see that you're looking directly through a stair. This is at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, but the stair is really light and skeletal. So we don't see the stair as this heavy object in the space, but something more light and free. The top image, this is the combination of wood with the black. It's still really warm and elegant. So we just like these are kind of inspirational images for us as we start to design what these stairs are going to be. This is just a series of other images that we keep going back to and saying, oh, we really like them. We like the feel of them. We are, you'll see green elements. We'd like to introduce a live green element in the space that will grow over time. This introduction of wood, creating a warm environment, lots of different lighting options, using lighting to kind of create space. So if there's taller space, maybe the lighting helps bring it down to scale. And then I love this kind of green on the walls and up on the ceiling. And to me, this has a very residential feel. And we heard from students over and over that they're very stressed and that they would like a space to be more calming. And so we want to kind of walk this line between it being a building that we know we have to maintain for a long time, but having a warm and cozy feel. So these are kind of some design images that we use as our inspiration. Now when we start to talk about lighting, there's really some cool opportunities in this space to use some funky lighting. Some things that are newer in lighting is this combination of lighting and acoustics and incorporating lighting into acoustic panels. And so we liked that these still were light, you could see through them. We don't even know where we would use these yet at this point, but we like them. And we like that, some are more simple, some are more funky. And then also in looking at the wood structures and thinking a little bit more industrial, maybe we do a spin on that. So we do kind of a modern industrial look and keep the lights simple. So we'll be playing with all sorts of lights throughout the whole process, and we'll look at so many. You'll be sick of lights by the end. But there's lots of cool things that we can do with it to kind of add a little bit more punch to the space. So this is our current rendering of the dining commons. So here you can see that incorporation of the wood deck and beams. The entrance to the auditorium, we've framed that out. We've allowed space for student artwork. And this is that double height volume. You can see right out to the forecourt. And we have incorporated some shading into the building itself. And you see the green wall in the back. And if there's any comments, other than that, I don't have anything else to say.
Just like with the exterior last time, is there any feedback or additional questions from the building
I had
committee?
a question on the floor. You mentioned polished concrete for the first floor. Would that be the initial pour of the slab, or
Yes.
would that be, so it'd have to be done and
Yep.
polish it right at first before
No, you go later.
anything was built?
No, you
So
go
it
later.
would
You go into there.
be protected for a long time.
Yeah, so usually what they'll do is they'll go and they'll do that pour up front, right? They'll have the building, then they'll protect it. And then the last thing that they'll come in and do is they'll come in and grind it, polish it.
Grind it, okay, not a burn finish,
it's not
so
burn
grind it,
finish,
I got you,
it's
okay,
Look
okay.
like terrazzo.
Actually,
Yeah, I
You'll
got
see
you.
the stones.
Yeah,
They come
I
through.
got you.
And we'll design it with control joints in there.
Right, so
Um,
it's a burn finish, not the polish finish, really, then?
Not burnt, it's ground.
Yeah,
It's
ground, I
like
mean, yeah, it's
terrazzo.
not burned with
It's
the
like
polish.
terrazzo.
It's not that the place is done later on, I got you, not during placement.
And we found it more successful to not put a stain into the concrete, so I think that will, unless we hear dramatically differently, but to try to keep the natural color, and where it's the color through, it won't show wear patterns as much. If it has a stain in it, it often shows wear.
But it definitely has a patina to it.
Right.
It will develop all concrete, it shrinks, it expands, so, there's going to be some areas where, you will have some cracks, but that's part of it, right? And we do the best job we can with control joints to make that work, but, you see it a lot. You can see it range from, the museum stuff to when you go to Home Depot.
Home Depot.
Right? And one of the nice things about it is, it's, you know, if you talk with Greg, he actually loves this idea because it's really good, it's durable, easy to maintain. So particularly for common areas, you know, corridors and that, it's something that we think works very well, and it has a relatively decent price point as well.
So it's beautiful, it looks awesome. The glass stairs though, like to keep that clean and, you know, the price on that, like that seems
So
so.
what we have to enclose the riser, and so we would look at a lot of different materials. Sometimes it might even be like a perforated metal, but something light that you would be able to see through. So it might not be actual glass, but we'll have to work with it.
Some element of transparency.
So, excuse me, where in that picture is where the students will get their meal?
So behind the stair, yeah,
Okay.
and it's not fully designed and developed yet. So they would get they're buying lunch, they would get their meal there.
Okay.
And then they're either able to go upstairs or directly in the dining commons to eat. And then last time I was here, we spoke a little bit about lockers. So I'm trying to find spots in and around here for the smaller lockers. That way if people are bringing their lunch and they want to grab it, then they can grab it really quickly and get to their spaces. Yeah, there's two. Okay.
So with the dining commons, how do you, this could have been a previous meeting that I haven't been at, how do you separate the middle school, high school populations?
So right now, we have enough seating to have 3 lunches. And so the current thinking is that middle school would eat at one time.
Okay.
And then the high school would have 2 sittings.
And John, do you see any scheduling that you would end up having middle school students because they're taking high school level classes, or where there would have to be that, you know?
I don't think so.
Interaction? Okay.
I don't think so. I think we would be able to just have, we're looking at having, you know, 3 lunches. One would be a middle school lunch,
Yep.
and then 2 would be high school lunches.
Okay.
There's enough variety in type of seating and the location of it, that if there happened to be a middle school class that needed to have that lunch, they could almost have their own area. Because this is sort of where the area where there's the most amount of seating. So when you come in those front doors, this is to the right. There's seating at the top of the stairs. There's also seating to the left of this, down this corridor. And on the second floor, there's also seating down to the left a little bit. So there's a bunch of different areas. And even in the better weather, there's the opportunity to maybe go into that courtyard area too. So again, we're envisioning 3 lunches, but if we did kind of come to some funky, quirky thing where that needed to happen, I think we could say, hey, you guys are going to just have lunch right in this area.
Thank you.
And there's another question?
John, while we're on the interior, would you give me a description of the gym and also where is the wrestling team going to work out?
So we have a number of different alternative workout spaces or alternative physical education spaces. One is in an alternative PE room, which is sized to hold the wrestling mats. So we've sized it specifically for that. Next to that is a room that we're calling kinesiology, but that also will hold lots of different physical fitness equipment, electrical equipment, as well as free weights. And then there's an athletic training room as well. The gym itself is quite large and has the space for 2 practice courts, 2 volleyballs, overlapping. We have seating for about 800, or that's our goal, telescoping bleachers for about 800, and it would be divisible by...
Are you on one side or both sides?
On one side.
And that's been a significant problem here at Pentucket for decades. Our boosters have lost tons of money because this is the worst place to have a state tournament basketball game. We've got some wonderful fields out there finally for our kids. I'm only one school committee member, but I have a real problem with putting seating on just one side when you should be able to maybe bring in 1,000 or 2,000 people. So that's a concern. The other concern I have is, would you describe what the middle school gym looks like, what their phys ed program looks like?
I am not the best person to do that, so I'm not going to.
So Dick, when you're talking about the
right.
gym, right, it's a different situation than what we have, there's no doubt about it, right? We have a gym here that's about 15,000 square feet. So, it's a little bit larger than if you had two kind of regular-sized basketball gyms, if you will. Like, for example, I'm most familiar with Page School, right? So the Page School gym is about 6,000 square feet. And so it's two of those plus another 3,000 square feet kind of on the perimeter to accommodate bleachers, additional run-out space, and then that transition towards the lobby. Okay, and it's not as many gyms as you have right now, right? It's just not. But the idea is to be able to have those two gyms act as, basketball court, so you can have practices there. There would be divider curtain there, and however that's set up, organizationally. And then a competition court along the long way with 800 seats. And it would be great to have more. There's no doubt about it. And I mean, Joe and I, we've talked about this a lot. But at the same time, you have to live within the bandwidth that the state's going to play ball on. We're already over the state guideline by 3,000 square feet. Right,
On the building or on the gym?
On the gym.
On the gym alone.
Just on the gym. So, that means that, we're already, talking about ineligible square footage, for that. And, there's so far you can go with them before it's an all stop on that. So, we've done, honestly, I think the best that we can at this point, and it would be great if we had, more space and people had more money and, the MSBA didn't care, but, that's just not the world that we're living in.
I feel that the middle school is the one the middle school right now has gone to a junior high in order to accommodate the innovation program. By the way, that's not a knock on the high school innovation program. I love it. But they've already made these concessions. The teams are gone. They would love to have the teams back and be a middle school again. And here, now we're going to ask them to do something very, very different in terms of phys ed. And wouldn't it be funny if we found out that phys ed, based on all the health issues that I read about, was the most important subject in school? And now we're taking that away. And what I've offered before, and I think there are some things that could go away in order for this to come in. And I've used the Hamilton-Wenham sample of the tee. That tee, in fact, tonight, their indoor track coach is on that tee, practicing hurdles, high jumps, the whole 9 yards. But the rest of it, that stem is the most beautiful, and it's a terrific place to have a state tournament game. I've been there. It's just fantastic. You could literally have thousands of people there, and the boosters could actually make some decent money. So I'm struggling with that. I'm going to have a difficult time. I want this to go through. I want to be voting yes, but I am definitely, I cannot see the middle school continuously taking hits so that other people can have what they want.
I'm not sure I understand the middle school.
Let me go here. May I go for a second?
Well, let me finish up with Dick, Joe.
All right.
Keep it about time, but I'm not sure what you mean by middle school taking the hit.
Well, the hit was they had to, in order for the kinds of things the kids are going back and forth between the schools, what they had to do was to cut out the teams. I thought that was a mistake because I think...
Teams educationally, not
yes,
teams
no,
in terms of athletics.
teams with teachers and kids.
Okay. Yeah.
And, yeah, I wasn't talking about athletics at that point. So they've given up a lot, and I'd like to see, in fact, I've talked to our new superintendent and assistant superintendent about them. I think they can put their heads together and maybe make that happen again. But that's the hit I'm talking about. And now we're going to give them another hit by no gym.
Well, that part I don't quite understand. Right?
I'll explain it to
I'll let
me.
the educator speak to the educational teams component, but when you say that they're going to take the hit on the gym, I don't understand that part.
Are the middle school going to have a gym?
Yeah, everybody's going to be able to have the gym to be able to go and use. Joe's going to make a different point in a second.
Okay.
But in terms of, right, the middle school kids being able to go and, use that gym for phys ed and be able to use the locker rooms, absolutely they're going to be able to do that right, as part of the educational and the school program. I think the bigger question is, is terms of usage by the communities for youth sports and for, right, middle school, high school, and the difference between going from a middle school, right, where there's one gym, and then, this facility where there's two gyms, and consolidating that into two gyms, right, there, albeit that they're bigger than some of those spaces.
So just a quick summary. So we were down in Winthrop and we talked to them. They have one single gym that's kind of in the center and it goes up 3 stories. And they have dividers. So you can break that court into 4, one big floor space, you can break it into 4. Sorry, getting aggressive. So you can break that one big floor space into 4 quadrants. When we talked to we had kids that were there, so you had middle school kids, and they had a curtain this way, so there was half the court, and they had this broken into quarters. So we had a half and 2 quarters, and there were kids in each one. There were some middle school kids in one half, or one of the quarters, and there were 2 high school classes in that half and the other quarter. So you can run them concurrently. When we spoke to the athletic director and the PE teachers, they said the one thing they wished was that their gym was bigger. Now, the gym we're putting in is bigger than that, but it's not as big. The gym we're putting in is not as big as North Reading's.
It's a little bit smaller, yeah.
It's a little bit smaller than North Reading. North Reading's, I saw for the first time
Gorgeous.
a couple weeks ago. It's huge. It's huge. I think there's a lot of wasted space.
It's 18,000 total, right? But as you know well, Dick, right, that a big part of that is on the 2 end wings. It's the connection, which is acting as a corridor back towards the locker rooms.
And they have theirs is set up so that you can, again, break it into quarters, a little more space in the quarters. I don't think that we necessarily have, like youth basketball, we wouldn't be able to have 4 concurrent practices at the same time, because it's like it's a little bit more than maybe a half court, but not quite a bunch more than that.
So I shouldn't be as worried as I am.
No, you should be worried. You should be worried. May I go? I want to go on record as I'm totally against, Brad and I have had several conversations about this, I'm totally against the size of the gymnasium and what they're proposing to do. What you've done and your concern about middle school students is absolutely correct. Middle school athletics is provided by the youth groups. They don't have, they're going to, so gym class is one thing, and the educators can speak to dividing the gym up, and if that's how they want to do it, that's all well and good. But when it comes to middle school athletics, which is run by parent groups, yeah, the middle school kids are going to lose out here. Right now, they have access to the middle school gym pretty much 5 days a week. When we go to one gymnasium, the high school athletics are going to use all that time. You're not going to put a 7th grade PYB basketball team in there with the high school boys. It's just not going to happen. So middle school kids, and Brad and I have talked about this, and I've been told it's not possible, but if it was to be a T, like you talk about Hamilton Wenham, or you talk about Melrose, where you put one gym, one competition court, and then a smaller gym at the end of it, and that can be even, so middle school size gym is 74 feet, a high school gym is 84 feet. So you could put a middle school size gym at the end, and that could still be used as a separate facility for a different team to practice. When the high school boys basketball team is going to practice in that gym, they're going to use all 15,000 feet. If you're the high school basketball coach, you're not going to have somebody on one side blowing their whistle when you're trying to go over something the next day. It's not going to happen. So all that space gets used up by one team, and from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock every night. So I'm totally against it, and I've been told there's no solution, but I just want to go on record as
Well, I think we've got enough talent in this room. I've worked with these architects before. I think they can pull it off.
They're difficult. They're difficult to work with.
I've worked with Brad.
So it comes down to there's 2 things that are limiting, right? One, the space that you have to go and do it, physical space to go and do it. But even if you could get by that, right? The bigger issue, I think, for you is how the process works with the state, right? You don't have, right, the population, all right, in terms of your enrollment projections to drive that number to go and say you can have 3 gyms, right? That's not, it's not us, it's not the architects, it's not even the administrators, right? That's how that process works, right? In North Reading, you have the same thing, right? That gymnasium is essentially the same from a functional perspective as what we're proposing here. The difference is, right, your enrollment here is 965 students, middle and high. The enrollment projection in North Reading is 1,450 students. Right? So, therein lies part of the deal. So somewhere, and I would love to go and see you have more, but how do you get there? Right? I don't have the key to that, to be able to go and tell the state, and you guys have been there and been through this with the state, to go and say, hey, maybe you should just change how you look at it.
See, I see this as a selling point. If I was to take Joe's position and understand, all 4 of my sons were part of the middle school program years ago.
Yeah.
And if I was to, that's a selling point for people to be encouraged to go and vote in favor of this.
Sure.
If in fact they know that their middle school kids are going to be well served throughout the winter, at least for the basketball program. But if not, what's the incentive?
Well, I'm not.
Where do my kids, if I've got middle school, I'm too old to have, thank God, middle school kids right now. But if I did, what do we do this winter if we've got a brand new school out back here?
Well, maybe I'm not quite as pessimistic as Joe is, but, I'm going to speak just as a parent, right, with 4 kids, right, if they've gone through the system. I would love to have it. Believe me, I would love to have a lot more than even what's happening here. But how do you do it, right? How do you afford it, right? How do you convince the state? I don't disagree with either of you guys.
I thought that if you got something that was over and above what the state would allow, they wouldn't prohibit you from doing that, but you just had to foot the bill for that additional.
No, that's true.
So they're not saying, they can't say, no, you can't have that.
They're not saying that, right, specifically.
Right, so you just got to foot the bill for it, right?
Well, it's a little bit more than that. The way that the formula works, you actually are penalized, okay, for having some of that extra space, right? But at the same time, it's just like we had this discussion about the indoor track, which Joe likes as well, as do I.
Yep.
But you got to pay for it, right? And when we talk about adding that type of square footage into the building, this isn't hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is millions and millions of dollars. So you guys, okay, direct me what to do, right? So we've been doing our best to go and follow the direction that everybody has, set forward. So this ground, I think we've covered. And, I don't know where we're going with all this, but I can say that sometimes, we're going to have to make some compromises here. I wish we did not. I wish we haven't had to make no compromises. And I would be one of the guys that would be probably hip to hip with Joe on this one because, all my kids play sports and other things. But I don't have a magic bullet for you guys on this one, right?
I think what we're saying, Brad, is, and again, we've had this conversation, so we're on the same page. A lot. I feel as though it's going to make it very difficult to get this passed.
So what is your answer then? What would you like us to do, given what I've explained to you?
I think you need 2 separate gym spaces, one for the high school team, for the high school athletics and the high school students, and you got to have a middle school space for middle school students.
So if you need that space, right, and it costs a certain amount of money, right, and it's really necessary for the community, would another avenue be to go out and say, hey, we've got to go and come up with this space for another gymnasium somewhere? Yes. But why have to hitch it to this project? When you've got everybody else, okay, that we're swimming upstream and could possibly take down the whole thing. Right? I'm speaking to you now as a parent who's interested in trying to get, okay, a building passed that's really important for all 3 communities. And if what we're saying is we need another gym, right, to be able to handle youth sports, right, I'll be the first guy to go out with you, right, and lobby for that and find a spot in one of the 3 towns and let's say, let's get an independent, okay, gymnasium structure and let's go get it done. But what I'm saying to you guys is don't take down this project because, right, we don't have enough space for youth sports because we're getting put into a box by how the state formulas work.
Right, I'm just looking at what's the word I'm looking for? Just the public perception of today, we have a middle school with one gym, we have a high school with a gym and a half, 2 gyms, and now we're proposing this $150 million project with one gym. And
It's not, that's not.
Different, it's 170 with 2.
Right? If we are going to go and talk about it in terms of square footage, right, I will give you, right, that you're going from 3 to 2, but it's not 1, right? Because the gyms that we have, okay, are small, right? And this is, when you go and you look at, for example, right, where, Dick has worked as well over in North Reading, and this model, right, works pretty well. If you talk to Dave, right, Dave's going to go and tell you, yeah, I would love to have more gym space. Of course, he's the athletic director, right? I would love to have it more too. But
Dave tells me it doesn't work, and I talk to the people that run the youth program in North Reading, and they tell me it doesn't work because they don't get access to the facility.
and everybody's going to want more time. You got it.
Can I ask a quick question? So I've seen a lot of fields outside. I've seen the new building. I've seen graduation day here when people are parked all the way down Farmline.
Yeah.
If we did build these gyms,
Yeah.
and they were all occupied, and we had a state tournament here, could we hold the capacity of thousands of cars?
You can't hold the capacity of thousands of cars, not thousands of cars, no. No, right, we're talking about in terms of parking spaces, allocated parking spaces, we're trying to keep it somewhere around 425-ish, right? There's always, like, when you have, people kind of go outside of the line, so to speak, right? So you can get more people.
So when they
So where
did
would we
it,
park these people if we did build these gyms? Bigger gyms. I mean, we're on our main road, where would the parking be to facilitate all those visitors or all those fans or
so
whatever?
what they do now, if there was a tournament, they might, like if you were hosting a regional meet, you park down in the Golden Pines, and you run a shuttle bus back and forth between the Pines and the school.
You'd need a garage to get everybody on site. I mean,
I have a desperate
Can we just
idea. When you go to Fell, the middle school, what if you left the gym?
So that's a great question, right? And when we were talking about
I
it.
just want to say, I've never even met this man. I just want to know, since I want to clear the air.
Right.
I've never had a conversation.
He just became my best
No, but no, I believe you, Jeff, right? It's a legit question, right? And so we looked at it, right? We looked at it, right? Greg, right? Justin, Jonathan, ourselves, because we said, what are people why don't we save that gym then? There's just not enough room, right, on the site to be able to go and get that over there and maintain your artificial turf field and try and have some semblance of parking that's going to be required for day-to-day operation of this and to have, a small now space for district offices. You just don't have enough room on this site. Like, there's a huge chunk of the site that is wet. And so when you go, and we tried to shoehorn it all in there, and I think we looked at that drawing, right? So you just can't get it in there and make it work.
Just one point of clarification on the gym usage, and I'm going to be making this up, but I think it's fairly accurate. So, I know, you can do this. So the gym and a half that we have here, the half gym in the wintertime is wrestling. And wrestling practice is there, and that's used for that. So in a youth sport, they don't get to use that unless, actually, you guys don't even, youth sports doesn't even touch the high school gym or during the weekday. But that's what's used now. And then the basketball teams are going to compete. If it was just a practice day, they're going to compete. You're going to have an early practice and a late practice in that gym. And at the middle school gym, the youth sports will use in the evenings for practices. So here, in this example, I just want to make sure you will have the opportunity to have a full court, both sides, with some type of divider. And it's probably be, I think what we saw in Winthrop was like a heavy nylon divider.
Sure.
And they say it kills noise a little bit, but I have to experience that to believe it.
It does.
What's not ideal, I would see this point all day long. If I'm a coach, this is not the basketball court I'm going to be playing on. Like the basketball court I'm going to be playing on isn't going this way, it's one big court going this way. So that's the downfall of having it set up like that. But you could run two concurrent full court practices at the same time, instead of doing it early, late, and you would have the potential, and again, Greg had, and I defer to him, because I think he and Joe worked together in scheduling out a lot of our buildings. But you be able to have youth sports practice in there in the evenings, if there's not a game. And of course, in the wintertime, there's games all the time. So there's definitely conflicts. I do like the point Brad made. It is a tough situation in these three towns. I mean, we've got new gym over at Page, you've got the new gym at Bagnell, and there and still, we don't have enough space for these youth activities, which have been growing by leaps and bounds. We have rec ball that's being done by each school, their intramurals, and then you have traveling teams as well. And they're all competing for a finite amount of space. And I like that line of, if we're gonna attach that to here, this is a problem. But that's not, as the superintendent, I don't view that as the school's problem. I view that as a community's problem. And I think to me, I would love to have that space, but for the purpose of making sure this building goes, and we have that academic advantage for our students, I need to keep those two things separate. But I'm only one person on the building.
Okay. I knew when we got into the gym, I could feel it coming. Right? Joe and I are good friends too, right? So we've talked about this a lot. I think you and I have known each other for a long time. So we think we've tried to do the best job we can working within, the guardrails that we have to do. I honestly can say that. But it would be great if we had more space, right? And maybe the next thing that we should be looking at is, where is a standalone thing to help alleviate that? Let's just talk for a second about, before we go to the exterior design slides, let's just talk a quick second about process and where we are. So I think Giovanna did a nice job talking about, interiors development. You can see just with some of those drawings where we've gone from, fairly conceptual type drawings to where now we're actually starting to get that stuff really nailed down and there's a lot more detail. I want everybody to understand that this represents about 15% when we're done with this phase of the overall design of the project. So one of the things, particularly with, computer generation 3D, it all looks like, oh, we're almost done and look how far along we are. That really isn't the case. The name of the game and what we're trying to do right now is we have a big milestone next week. Our team's been working really hard. Next week, we're putting our pricing set, all of the documents, which are a huge set. Okay, and those are going out to two estimators to independently review them, price them, and then we will be reconciling those on February 4th. So that's a huge step for us as a team. Ultimately, we don't have all of this design, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we have things in there so that the estimators can see it, and so that we have placeholders for things in terms of things like materials. There's this whole array of different materials on there. And so we've been truth testing some of this with the working group. We watch you pretty closely in terms of how you react to things so that we have a sense of what we can put in there so that we have that carried as part of the cost. But the decisions aren't necessarily made. So we don't know whether those chairs are green. We don't know if those are the light fixtures that we're ultimately going to end up with. But we know we're going to have chairs and we know we're going to have light fixtures, so we need to make sure we get those into the set so that we have an estimate that reflects that cost. Similarly, when we go to the exterior, right, we're doing that with respect to materiality of the building. And we gave you a quick sneak peek there last time out, and now we can maybe go to that, Jay, of what the building looked like. And what we took away from that was generally we seemed to be heading down the right road in terms of how the building was massing, how the fenestration, the windows and everything worked. The composition with respect to the kind of, brick color there and the gray on the bottom. And so now what we're starting to do is we're starting to refine that a little bit more and get into what might some of these actual materials be. And we talked about, you can see on the gym on the left side there, for example, the top 2/3 is represented as brick. And then the gray area on the bottom, we talked about as some type of masonry. So there's lots of different types of masonry, right? It could be types of brick, it could be types of precast stone, and those comes in lots of different flavors and shapes, and a lot of those are represented, so you can take a look at these here at your leisure at the end of the meeting. But what we wanted to do is start to explain that a little bit to you and then get a little bit more feedback, in particular on the admin building. Because what we walked away from at the last meeting is you said, we're headed down the right path. And we looked at this admin building. As you start to enter towards that space, it's kind of a special spot. It's kind of the focal point of the building. It could be something different. It doesn't have to necessarily be, representative of other materials there. It's the main entrance to the building. You walk into, as Giovanna said, perhaps one of the most special public spaces in the building with the dining commons and the connectivity of the building. So we've been focusing a little bit on, how do we treat that? And, what is that exterior cladding? And we're just trying to get a little bit of feedback. And this is what we actually showed you the last time, which is a product that's called a Prodema product, but it's essentially an epoxy resin rain screen that represents wood. And there's some pieces of it here on the table. But
This one here,
pardon?
this one?
No, that's a masonry product right there. But that's it right there, and you can just pass that, around one of them. And so that's applied to the exterior of the building. And it gives you this feeling of it's kind of a wood, but it's not a wood product in the sense of it doesn't require maintenance. So that was one look that we gave you, and that's what we left you with. And everybody seemed to say, yeah, that's good, treat that one, it's kind of a little bit special. What other things might we look at? So we explored that a little bit more. One of the key things in mind when we think of exterior materials, right? And I have to keep a straight face when I'm looking over at Mr. Haddon over here, is, the kind of the durability of that. Durability in terms of longevity, in terms of how it works with the actual setup of the wall so that we don't have mold buildup. Durability if somebody throws a baseball at it, that it doesn't break, all those types of things. We even talked about bees and bees' nests. And, how does that work? So we started looking at other products, and they come in different families, but one of the products that we're keen on is it's actually a terracotta rain screen. And this is a piece of it here, okay, which is what that kind of admin building is intended to represent, right? And it's basically terracotta, it's been around for centuries. The guys that make it tell you all we're doing really is cooking dirt, right? So it's super, super durable. You can pass that around. And, it works, and it comes in lots of different shapes, sizes, shingles. That's actually a terracotta product that you just had there, but it's got a wood grain finish on it.
This one?
You can go and have it in a huge array of colors, textures, all kinds of different things, and it's super durable. So that's kind of looking at it, right? That red color, you can zoom in on that, and you can see it's different than brick, but it also talks to or speaks to, the brick that would be going on the upper 2/3 there. There's a relationship there, right? And it's something that in this particular rendering, right, it's talking about it, kind of similar in terms of how the shade would work. And you can do lots of different things with patterning with it.
So you're okay with putting that at ground level?
Well, we would have actually something down at the base.
No, but I'm saying just for people to touch and baseballs and...
Yeah.
That's all right?
Yeah, durable stuff. Hopefully, we're not throwing baseballs at that part of the building, but...
We're in that area.
Right, and it actually sticks right up onto a girth system that goes right onto the wall. And if something broke, you can replace it, right? That beige piece at the end there in front of Mr. Lemieux is actually, it comes in very long pieces. You can get different textures on it, so, the world's your oyster.
You can break that up. You can break it up.
Yeah.
Look at that, it says like checkerboard.
So that's one look that we have there. And if we go, and then we started exploring same material but different color, right?
Oh, like that.
And going and saying, we're talking about two different families here, kind of more of a reddish brick tone, which we showed you can be represented in terracotta. And then we said, well, what if we start to play off of a little bit, some of the masonry that's used on the 1/3 of the building, right? Again, because, you can see them, there's a whole bunch of them over here. They come in lots of different shades of gray, so to speak. And, we went and said, well, that's kind of interesting too. We kind of like that a little bit, actually. And so if you zoom on this, it's a little bit different look in terms of, here, instead of it having a horizontal element, it's a vertical element, right? Ms. Redding doesn't like the vertical element.
I said prison, you said jail.
Right, we can see that, right? So we said, well, maybe Ms. Redding will respond well to the vertical element, so let's back it out again and said, wow, it looks the same pretty much from there when you're standing a long ways away. But what if we zoom in on that and said, hey, let's go back to that horizontal element, right? And again, you can do it lots of different ways. And the one thing that we're not showing here yet is actually on these windows, just like we showed this solar shading, right, which is called brise de soleil on the curtain wall there. We're probably going to have something on the windows of this administration building as well. So, back out,
Vinyl shutters.
you can see, that it definitely gives you different feels between the two colors. Another alternative here, right, that would be something that would typically be used material-wise is, a metal panel perhaps, but one of the things that we heard from everybody is that we're really not, at this part of the building, we're really not so interested in having, a metal panel there. We have some other areas of the building, right, that break it up with some metal, but here on this, that wasn't the direction that people seem to be going. So what is people's feedback on the admin building there? Grays, terracottas?
I don't like the gray.
I don't either.
Yeah, it looks like a jail.
The gray,
I don't like vertical either.
gray horizontal with something to break it up would be nice.
That could work. Gray horizontal.
If you move them fast enough, Jay, no one will know, yeah.
I don't know about that color.
So they're all.
How about something lighter like that,
They're just
down the end of the table,
So
Stephanie?
the terracotta is.
How about something a little lighter like that?
that might look okay.
That's why I always wanted to see what it looked like lighter.
So we're not picking, we're not asking for decisions tonight, but we're just going and trying to, read the tea leaves a little bit in terms of, what do you think of this type of material versus the Prodema wood look?
What's the difference in price point?
Right now?
Between the two?
Pretty close.
Pretty close?
Pretty close. Yeah, pretty close.
Do you want to do a show of hands, like who liked the one versus the other?
No, that's too rigid for me.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get a sense, we're going to come back to people, but we're just trying to understand, because maybe everybody says, no, I don't like terracotta at all. And then we have to go back to the drawing board. What we're going to do is we're going to carry something here for this material that's probably the higher price point for the estimate, at least initially. So it gives us flexibility to go down, and we can have savings if we go down versus having to go the other way. It's not a huge cost impact on the building because it's a relatively small area.
So rather than ask which one of these board choices we like the best, what about the question, do you think this admin piece wants to blend in? Or do you think you want this piece to stand out?
And actually, there's different different ways of doing that, because it can stand out. And if you think of the glass, having gray or the frame, the structure is gray with glass. So it could stand out, in this case it was terracotta color, orange color, or red color, again with the glass, which has gray frames, then it stands out from that part of the elevation that you look at. Whereas if you look at the overall building, there's the middle school wing, then there's the high school wing, and then there's the administration with the connective tissue, which is what we're calling. So in this case, the admin block essentially is talking to the connective tissue because the framework is also gray. If you think about, so that's one way of looking at it, say it stands out from the building overall, but it's part of the area where everybody, both middle school and high school, are going to be, which is the admin block is middle school and high school as well. So if it was more the orange brick colors, it stands out from the glass part, but it blends with the brick. So either way, it really is blending or standing out. So
Are the only two choices really to be the brick color or the gray color, or is there something
No,
else?
it's actually infinite.
Because I like that. Like a dark or.
one of the nice things about this terracotta material is that you have, these are just a few colors, for example.
Yeah.
And then you can also, these are glazed terracotta, Then this is, over here is, like, the big piece over there is more of unglazed.
Well, no, I'm kind of
terracotta. So
asking
you can have
more,
different colors.
like, for a good architectural look. Are the only two options really gray and brick, or are there other things? Because you've only shown us, I guess, brick color and gray color.
That's true. In this
So
case,
is there
you're right, but those
something
are not
else?
the only option.
Because I'm not so sure that people were really opposed to the wood as much as they were opposed to maybe the wood in a brick color, because it looked too much like brick.
It's competing with the brick.
Yeah, so like if it was still a wood,
That contrasts
yeah, a different
it a little
color.
bit without being gray.
Right, so there's not as much flexibility or range of color options and the like in the Prodema or whatever that product ends up being.
Yeah, yeah, it's just that, like the color that you chose for the rendering, it looks like the same color as the brick, the exact same color.
Or close enough, but not almost really.
Yeah, and
Could you lighten it up?
it could be, you can see here, you know, there's a huge range of them. Right?
Yeah, so, yeah, if you just change that to a different wood color.
So that material that one is representing more of a wood grain. At the time, we were talking about the Prodema product, which is the non-wood, wood grain looking material.
Yeah.
This is actually also terracotta, which has a wood grain.
Okay.
So you can have the durability of the terracotta material, the confidence that this is a material that is durable, very as maintenance-free as the brick. And it actually has even better options if something if somebody graffitis brick, you cannot remove the brick. If somebody graffitis this, you can't.
So you're saying this is not the best durability-wise? We're better with the terracotta product? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's pretty durable stuff, but you know, this will outlast pretty much. It's like brick, right? It'll outlast anything.
It'd be good to have something to go 50 years.
Oh, they'll all go 50 years, right? But there, you know, there's no really warranty on terracotta because just like there's no warranty on bricks.
I've got terracotta inside my chimney.
But it's been around forever, right? Whereas, you know, there is a warranty on that, and that's a 10-year warranty, but it'll last a lot longer than that. But
I mean, I kind of
There's
like.
confidence with the terracotta.
so there you go. You can see how some of those things, how it changes it.
I kind of like the idea of having a wood grain, some kind of wood grain, just because I think it is nice with the fact that you're using so much wood on the inside.
Yep, there's definitely a play there too. We've talked about that, yeah.
And it's more of a New England look than like a little bit of a Southwest look if you start going to terracotta.
Okay.
So that's just, I'm just one person.
That's
so-
a real valid
It's another way of looking at it.
In this particular color range, you may actually be able to marry both ideas. You know, have a terracotta product.
Yeah.
Right.
In a light wood grain.
Terracotta color.
That we're never going to be able to match exactly what's happening with whatever the glue lamp beams are inside.
Right.
But that would be the gesture, is to have them read as a complement to one another.
So we'll have more, right, that we'll continue to show you, but we wanted to give you a sense of where some of that stuff is heading, just materiality-wise, because we're starting to, you know, lock and load on some of those. We're going to have a higher price point number, at least initially, for this smaller area to give us some more flexibility. Similarly, on the band that goes along the building there, the gray area, okay? Yeah, right there. That's a good look. So that wall, that gray area is actually probably about as high as the ceiling, just to give you a sense of scale. You know, it's about 12 feet. And so we talked about that in terms of masonry products, and there's a wide range. You know, we've got precast stone, right, that's in here, that, you know, can go up into panels of up to 12 feet. There's some examples of that. We'd have to figure out, you know, how we would have, you know, that broken up. There's also, you know, those can come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but, you know, I think most people are familiar with precast, you know, that's that product there. We also could do something like that in a gray brick, and we've been kicking around the idea of, this is actually called a Norman brick. So it's double wide, regular size, and, you know, we could get this in a gray color, and I think that would actually help to break that down a little bit. So we kind of like that idea, we're exploring that. There's some price benefits maybe associated with doing something like that. You know, similar, right? This is a different size brick than your traditional modular brick. And then you can see, and these come in, bricks come in, we'll have hundreds of bricks that we'll review. Literally hundreds of bricks that we'll review when we start to get this all narrowed down. We won't show them all to you. But, that's a traditional modular size brick. And, for the size of that area, we think that we probably would go with a little bit bigger brick, because we think that, we'll break it down a little bit more. So that's where we're headed. We've got the model that we can show you. We can do a little flyby. This is still in a SketchUp model. We've actually got this in a Revit model, and to our, guests here from We Are Pentucket, after we get the set in and start working through that estimate reconciliation, get our information into the MSBA, we're going to start to work on imagery that both the district can use and that you can use to be able to start to go and get the word out about what this is all about. We can have flyby models, all of that type of stuff we'll start to work on. But this just gives you, again, a sense of what that is, and Jason can kind of twist it around a little bit in there. Anybody have any other questions? No decisions required tonight, but we still headed in the right direction generally?
Are there folks in the room that haven't seen this, that weren't with us last time?
Yeah, I think so.
I might have missed making a few minutes late, but on the interior setup with the movable walls between classrooms, how do you envision security to look for any kind of security issues?
You mean for in-class security? Yeah, so in-class security, interior to the room, so we're going to have your door, and if there's any glass that's there, we'll have shades associated with that. We'll have hardware that can, that will be able to lock those spaces down. So however that determines this.
So the wall will still be able to be locked, because I thought I saw like foldable walls, movable walls.
In a couple of spaces.
There's movable walls, there's one set in, I think there's a total of 5 classrooms that can be opened up. But those classrooms would still have doors that can lock.
Correct.
And then also in designing the classrooms and designing the glass into the classrooms, we've been really careful to think about sight lines, and we've tried to locate in every classroom an area. Some classrooms have a storage room that students could go into in case of a crisis. Other classrooms do not, but we have tried to design it such that the sight lines into the classroom, students could all crowd into one area and not be seen. So we have been doing our best to be mindful of that. And try to, it's a balance.
And are there is it common now to put in doorways in the hallways?
We will. We'll actually have specific zones that we'll be able to lock down. So both in terms of emergency situations, as well as being able to zone off the building for events. So if you had a public event, we'd be able to kind of lock down some of the other wings that we don't necessarily want people to have to. There's no reason for them to be in. So we'll be able to lock those areas down as well. Yeah.
So just do a quick orientation for the folks who haven't seen this. Route 113 is out here to the right, where this proposed baseball diamond overlay field is located is where the single-family home currently sits. This is parking and stormwater retention where the current pond exists. The existing high school is about here, and then the building itself is being proposed on the current baseball diamond football field. The Merrimack River is over here, and the campus is bisected by a perennial stream where there's a deep ravine right here. This is the existing district offices to remain, and the existing middle school is essentially where we're proposing a new multi-purpose artificial turf field with bleachers and what we call a bleacher building behind that. So,
Are there lights on that?
On the bleacher building?
On the
Field.
So as part of this project, what we're doing is we're setting it up to go and have all of the electrical conduit and everything run to actually go and put the pads in for Musco lighting, which is what you're going to end up with there. So we put those tubes in, so all the foundations would be in. And then with the idea of being able to come back and have that later as potentially a potential donation to it, because if you put a donation in now, it's just going to be extracted from your MSBA grant. So we're going to do all of the kind of critical infrastructure work to do that, so you don't have to come and rip stuff up later.
Up to the point of basically just coming and bolting the light things on top of the
Well,
cement
pulling,
pads.
and pulling the wire.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so the conduit there, the foundation that you bolt, even with the little bolts sticking up just so they can, boom.
Correct.
Okay.
What would be a rough cost of that donation? Like, what would lighting cost?
I think I've read the check.
I got it in my car.
It's cool, $500,000-$600,000 or something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
What about scoreboards?
Scoreboards are in.
They're in.
So this is approximately the view you would get as you turn onto the site, and we would make our way down the drive aisle here to the front of the building. We've got the high school wing on the right, north. This is dining commons, admin and guidance, and the gymnasium on the left. There's a service road that runs around the north side of the building. So we have classrooms, high school classrooms in this wing. This is the back of the servery and the student dining area. This is back of house, kitchen, custodial, things like boiler room, main electrical room below, high school classrooms on the second and third floor at the back. As we come around the west side of the building, again, there's the boiler room. These are the music classrooms immediately behind the auditorium that you see sticking up here. This is bus entry and the arts corridor that leads directly to the dining commons at the front of the building. So we have art classrooms, the drama studio, more art classrooms, and the library and digital creation lab on the second floor just off the dining commons. We have this exterior courtyard that we've been talking about now for quite a while. This space here is the PE alternative space. We've got the other health and PE kinesiology lab, training space along this side of the corridor, middle school classrooms above. This sort of bridge feature that you see is part of the library experience. And when Justin was talking about the possibility of outdoor dining, we actually have a little bit of an overhang at the back of the dining commons. So there's a potential even for a little sheltered outdoor seating in agreeable weather. As we rotate around the other side of the building, this model is a little bit incomplete in this area, but these are all the locker rooms. And so we would expect there to be high windows to provide some daylight but no views into those spaces. And then middle school classrooms above. And just like we saw on the high school side right there, the middle school side also has these breakout extended learning spaces. So there was a question about middle school teaming a little while ago.
Yes.
Even though the district isn't executing that idea educationally right now, this building is set up so that they could return to that if they so chose. By having 2 levels of middle school, there's enough classrooms that you could organize in a number of different ways, including having 1 grade level per floor, right, as grade level teams. This is the end of the dining commons coming out towards the south. And then as we orbit back around, we have the gymnasium with a little bit of corner glazing and these high windows with north-facing glass that we think will be really nice daylight without glare issues. So that was a quick fly around. Are there any questions about the exterior in that regard?
Nope.
Yeah, we just want to review next steps. Okay.
So the next item on the agenda is John's going to review what this mysterious 3011 form is.
So we waited till you were good and tired to talk about money. So basically, the Form 3011 is the basis of the whole budget. Okay, it is the budget. What we submit to the state in about 4 weeks is the number that we as a district live with through construction. Okay, so that number can only get better, it can never get worse. If it gets worse, that's bad. Projects don't happen, votes, because you're voting a finite amount of money, we need to come in under that. So you've got the diagram. Okay, so it's a little, thank you to Dorn Whittier for putting this together. This is an awesome illustration of kind of what does it mean. So total project budget. So at the end of the day, any cost we have for this job is part of that total project budget, okay? So that 3011 form, which I'll show you in a minute, these are kind of the major categories. Feasibility, that's kind of what we're in right now. After feasibility, you've got OPM fees, you've got designer fees. You've got CM fees, that's for your construction manager. Okay, so when we were WT Rich, we're almost done our negotiations with them right now. We've got those fees for them to come in and do the estimate. We've got the fees for them to do pre-construction with us, and then we have their construction costs to actually build the building. So that's the next section, construction cost. Then we've got alternates. So what are the things above and beyond the building that we're working on? Well, we've got the district offices, and we've got the outbuilding down at the field. We've also got additional services that we'll end up having to pay for throughout the project. Utility fees, you're going to pay the utilities to bring the new gas line in, the new water line in, whatever it is. We just want to make sure we have a placeholder for it. And then we also have modular swing space moving. That's another category that they put on there. At the very last category, furniture and technology. Okay, so your furniture, fixture, equipment. So basically, if you pick up the building and shook it, everything that falls out, your desks, your chairs, your bookcases, all of that. Then technology, whether it's a smart board, a projector, computers for the teachers, all of that stuff kind of fits into those categories. So, we add all that up, and that's how we got to that. That was that $155 million number that you all heard, okay, before. And that included contingency, all right? So the big thing, though, to understand is the MSBA reimburses as a basis of eligible costs, not total costs. So we say, okay, well, what's eligible, what's ineligible? The MSBA has a lot of caps on certain categories. So if you take a look, this center white column here is kind of all of the things they won't pay for, and we'll show you what that does. So as an example, OPM fees and designer fees. If my fees for the remainder of the project go above 3.5% of the construction, that's considered ineligible. Brad's fees, if they go above 10%, that's ineligible. As a total, if soft costs go above 20%, that becomes ineligible. And what are some of those other soft costs? Well, third-party construction testing, hazmat monitoring while we're doing abatement in the building. There's kind of other soft costs that don't fall into either of our category, but they're still deemed a soft cost. CM fees, those CM fees that we're going to be charged, they won't pay for them for the things that are for the district offices or for the outbuildings. Also, when we talk about construction, flooring abatement, all this great tile, they don't pay a penny for that. So we come up with what that cost is. They don't participate at all just because it's one of those things. It's like pools. There's a list of things the MSBA in their charter won't pay for.
I can elaborate on that just a little bit.
Go ahead,
John. The reason the MSBA doesn't reimburse for flooring abatement is because some school districts take it upon themselves to abate that material outside of any MSBA project. So what they didn't want to have happen was districts waiting to do that if they had flooring in really bad condition, hoping that the MSBA would help pick up the tab for that. So they wanted to create an equal playing field for all school districts in the Commonwealth related to that one particular item, sort of a specialty exclusion.
So it's easier for them to just say, we don't do it. The site cost, that's one of the big ones you've heard about. As soon as site costs, the cost to do all the earthwork, excavation, paving, all of those things, as soon as they exceed 8% of the total construction cost, that becomes ineligible as well. Also, when we talk about square foot costs, you'll see here, $333 a square foot. That's what they pay. If our building is $533 a square foot, $200 per square foot times every square foot in this building is ineligible. So you're really only getting 50 whatever percent of the 333. You're not getting 50% of the 533. Also, as we said, the district offices and outbuildings, 100% ineligible. Anything you're going to pay for the utility companies, that's 100% ineligible, as well as modular swing space moving, those kind of costs. FF&E and technology, they earmark $1,200 per student. In our estimate, we're carrying $1,500, $1,200 for furniture, $1,200 for technology. That's $2,400 they'll cover. Our budget we're carrying is $3,000 per student for right now. So basically what you see is you get your total project budget, you calculate all of those caps and come up with a list of ineligible costs. You subtract the ineligible costs from the total, and those costs become the basis for your grant, okay? That basis for your grant is what that MSBA reimbursement rate gets applied to. Okay, so when you hear the rate, which won't be finalized, for a little while yet, but it's somewhere in the mid-50s for you guys. It's based on a base rate that's recalculated every year based on the economics of the 3 towns put together. You get points for how good your maintenance program is in the district, and yours is very good. You get a couple of points for energy incentives.
Sorry, you said our maintenance program was what?
Very good.
Just want to make sure.
Him, it's all him. And that's up to two reimbursement points, and the lead or the chips, whichever we're going to go for. And you're always going to go for those two extra points. So those are 4 points that get added to your base rate. That's how you get to the max. So at the end of the day, they apply that percentage to what those eligible costs are. And then that becomes the basis of your total grant. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you kind of the draft 3011 we're putting together right now. So before I show you the numbers, what we've used so far for the construction numbers are the numbers that were originally done by Jordan Whittier's estimator, PM&C, that drove us to that 155 number. As I said, we have a construction manager that we have on board now. We won't replace these numbers until this process that takes place over the next 2 weeks is done. We're actually going to give W.T. Rich the drawings. They're going to give PM&C the drawings again, and they're both going to estimate this thing from scratch. We're going to come back together and reconcile those, and then it's with that reconciliation, that information, that will populate this 3011. Thank you. Okay, so this is the form in all its glory. So right now, the only things that you know for sure are these two numbers at the top. Your OPM feasibility study and your architect's fees. Those are the only things that are the solid numbers. Everything else on this page is still an estimate, and we're working through that estimate as we go. The columns G, H, I, J, and K off to the right, those are kind of that's the area where all the calculations for the things that are ineligible take place, okay? So we go ahead and we populate this first column with the estimated budget. We fill in total number of students, 965. We fill in the total square footage that the program's calculated on, and a lot of magic happens, or a lot of bad news, because they then take things away. Now, I'll show you, for instance, the site as an example. So when we went through and did the estimate for the site work, right here, I don't know if you can see it, $10,974,462. Over here, if you can point to that, it right away calculated the exclusion of $5.3 million. So we populate the $5.3 million in, and this drops down. This whole column is things that are ineligible in the process.
That's because that number is more than 8% of
Correct.
Your original estimate is now.
Correct. So 8% of 120, where are we there? Here. So yeah, so your direct, it's 8% of the direct building cost. Okay, so the direct building cost is 70 million. 8% of that is 5 and change. That's what they'll pay for. Anything over the 5 and change is deemed ineligible. So we talk about, here we go down here with, as an example, 965 students times $1,200 a student, $1,158,000. But our budget is $1,500 a student. That makes $289,000 ineligible. So showing you how the 3011 works. Here it is at $1,500 for each of those items. Here's the deduction for the $250 per student over. Here's the basis of our grant. So basically, long story short, our total project budget before contingency, okay, before we add on those extra buckets of money that we hope we don't need, but we need to have, $145 million total project budget, excluded because of all of those things they don't pay for, $46 million. The basis of your grant, $99 million. So the estimated grant is 55 out of the 145, making a district share of about 89 million. Right in the ballpark of what we talked about kind of at the beginning of all of this. What gets added to that are the contingencies. So we carry roughly a 5% construction contingency, 5% of the construction cost of 120 million. We carry a 1% owner's contingency for things that come up. And then, so that's another $7 million. They will pay that percentage of those costs if they deem them eligible. But again, change orders are reviewed on a quarterly basis with the MSBA. But that's how we get, when we add the contingencies to the job, that's how we get to 152. So you say, wait a minute, that's lower than the 155. So some of these numbers have already started to shake out. So what we're hoping is that after we go through this with the CM, that we're even lower. As an example, the general conditions that we carried in this estimate that PM&C calculated, it looks like W.T. Riches are already going to come in about $1 million to $1.5 million less, which comes off of that number. So we're already at 151. So we're moving in the right direction. So just kind of in summary, before contingency, that's just what I told you before, total project budget, $145 million, less an estimated grant of $55 million, leaves a district share of about $89 million. If you add in the contingencies, the district share is about $95 million. So the difference between that 89 and 95 is how much of that contingency you use, but when the project budget gets voted, you vote it with the contingency. Again, you vote that max. And then the district ultimately will sign a project funding agreement with the MSBA. The MSBA will basically say, okay, you know, your total grant is $57 million based on a construction cost of 120 whatever. So, you know, that's it. You shake hands, you get moving. If as we go through the process, if W.T. Rich suddenly comes in and says, okay, I can build it for 115 million, that $5 million times the reimbursement rate, they take it back. So your grant drops from 55 million to 52.5 million. And those are budget revision requests. Those things happen, you know, budget revisions that happen along the way. You'll sign after the job gets its guaranteed maximum price. They kind of reset everything and say, okay, now you know what you're going to spend with the contractor. Now we're going to take back that money. So, you know, you don't hold it, we do. So it's a lot of information, a lot of stuff on here, but what we wanted to show you is that there's a lot of little intricacies to this. And the next big moment for us is when we get those two estimates back, because obviously the lion's share of this job is the construction cost. And we're hopeful that those numbers are, you know, will come in favorable. Questions? Glazed over. Everyone's like, I'm done, I want to go.
So where do the penalties appear if you get things that Mass Schools doesn't support or pay for? Are there penalties, you know, beyond what just slides over to our column? Because we were talking before about the gym.
Well, if you use the gym as an example, if suddenly you said you wanted to build another 10,000 square foot gym at $550 a square foot, that's $5.5 million that goes right to the ineligible column because you're already over that $333 a square foot.
But it doesn't affect the original agreement as to what they will grant.
No, but to Brad's point, there's a point at which they'll let you go a little bigger. They would have to let you include that in the project. Make it be part of the scope of work.
There's a special policy related to overages in the gym category. We already know that the MSBA has said certain things will be ineligible just because we have more art rooms than they would typically have in a project of this size. Those things aren't subject to this same policy that the gym will be subject to, but the 3,000 square feet of the gym overage will be subject to this disincentive as we've described it previously. And that will show up in the 3011 form. There's a special spot for that.
Yeah, and just that's a great segue. This is our pass at this before we have the full data. This gets submitted with the SD. They chew on it for about a week and a half. They invite us to come in with the district and say, okay, here's how we see it. And therein is the discussion of, okay, you had 300 extra square foot of art rooms but you were a little light here, you know, and you kind of decide, you have that final discussion about, okay, are you going to pay for that 300 extra square foot of art room, or are you going to dock it as completely all ineligible at $500 and whatever a square foot and move that over? So it's scope and budget conference. So we kind of, that's where you lock it in with them. That's kind of the last time you have a conversation before it gets approved at the board meeting and comes back to all of you and say, okay, we start the clock for the vote to get them an affirmative vote back. And that's kind of the next step. You know, once this goes in, we go back, there'll be a lot of back and forth regarding the design, there'll be some back and forth regarding the total project budget. They will approve the job on April 13th, I think it is, April 13th. And they'll say, okay, once you get that, you've got 90 days to come back and prove to us that you can fund the job. Once you come back with all of those votes, the district signs off, and no, it's either 90 or 120. It's 120, excuse me, it's 90 for accelerated repair. You've got 120 days to come back with affirmative votes. If you do that, you sign off on that agreement, and Dorn Rudier is off to the races, designing the rest of the job, pre-construction, you know, when the job starts, you know, the design, the CM gets involved heavy. You know, you could see work, you know, within 10 months, 9 or 10 months.
John, I thought in the beginning that we were talking about a 50% pay back from, but those numbers come up like 30, 33 or something, right?
Just under 40.
Just under
40. If you look back at the stuff that when the boards were done, the effective rate we were carrying was around 40.
But that's off the 150, right? Not the 120. We're paying 90,000, right? 90 million, I mean.
Your share is roughly 90
really,
is
right?
90 million. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct, divided by the three
Does that include the admin building and the outbuildings? No. Or has that already been removed?
Yes, right now, those numbers still include the admin building and the outbuilding as fully ineligible. So,
but they're in the 90 million.
Correct.
Thank you.
They're in the 90 million. So what will happen when we send this to the others is we're going to get some real, you know, more current numbers on those two things, and then make the decision on what we're going to do with the district offices and how we're going to handle that.
So are they only paying 50% or so of the 120, and we're picking up the 120 to the 150 and the 50%?
No, they figured it differently.
They figured it out differently.
Say again.
It's confusing.
They take the 150, they subtract all the things they're not going to pay from, then they give you 50% of what's left.
Yeah, so, right. So there was 145.
But you mentioned they're only paying certain percentages on just the cost of the building alone, which is only 70 million, so they broke out of the 150.
No, they use that 70 as a function to figure out the site.
That number, okay.
That's why you shouldn't even look at those columns on the right. The important number for you is
40%.
No, hang on.
90 million.
The important number is, let's look at the pink box down at the orange box down at the bottom. Total project budget right now is 152. We take away the 57, okay? This is with contingency. The district share would be 95. Okay. You got to keep the contingencies in there. That's the big number. So it's the 95. Their grant will be in the ballpark of $57 million, depending on, and again, this reimbursement rate we have here of 56, this is all, none of that's solidified yet. So the idea is once we submit this and we come back to you, those numbers are locked in. Once we have that first meeting with them, we know where this is going to fall out, we know what our numbers are going to be. And then from there on, they don't change. We can't change them, they can't change them. We agree on the project scope and budget. We agree on what the scope is, we agree on what the budget is, and everybody signs.
So your 56 is the 5289 we got now, plus 2 for lead, 2 for maintenance, you're guessing?
2 for lead, 1.5 for maintenance.
2 for lead, 1.5, so over here, 1.5 for maintenance, 2 for energy efficiency. There used to be a point for going CM at risk, but they've done away with that now.
So John, are these numbers consistent what you see? I mean, your firm uses has seen many projects. Are these numbers consistent, like the percentage consistent to what we should have expected, or?
Oh yeah, the rate is never the rate. The effective rate is always 15 to 20 points lower. It's all what's really a function of that. Like we're building an elementary school on a hill right now. Makes your site costs look heavenly, okay? Because it's just but it's the only spot they had. So as a percentage of site costs, they're getting hit even worse in that category.
So like 536 per foot, is that what we're paying? 5 something per foot, whatever it is.
550.
Oh, that 5.3, I was just throwing that out there as a sample number. So if you take, no, it's actually more than that, Joe. It's,
It's more than 550?
yeah.
So where does MSBA come off with their reimbursement number is,
333?
you can't build a school for 330?
No, you can't. You can't. That number slowly creeps up year after year.
And then our creeping with
Every year they reevaluate. I think the last number that was on this spreadsheet was a whopping 326, went up $7 a square foot. It's just, this is the,
So this program basically is becoming less and less lucrative or less and less appealing.
yeah, well, what's happening, you know, the harsh reality is, you know, the market is hot, everybody's busy, and you've got some really big schools in the market, like, you know, Durfee, 300 million, Lowell, 350 million. They're looking at trying to stretch their dollars, even for, you know, this, I look at this 333 like, well, what's my tax rate at home or what's my house assessed at? It all comes down to the same tax bill. One number makes you feel better than, you know, oh, my house is worth X, yeah, I'm gonna get taxed at a lower rate. Same kind of thing with this. You know, it is what it is to get to the numbers for the money that they have and the, you know, the programs they let in.
So, and also, they have, I think on their website, they have charts of what their reimbursement had been over, so since they've started. And it wasn't initially, it was MSBA, but 20 years ago when we attempted this, it was called
School Building Authority.
SBA. So the price per square foot, usually the last 10 years, they've still reimbursed right around $315, $320. And while that's been relatively steady, of course, the cost of construction, because everything's been good, has gone exponential. So there are massive gaps. And in terms of being a good program, bad program, we're not paying anything for it. But the cost would still be $100 whatever million for the project.
I will tell you,
So let's just fast forward here. So let's assume that this all gets approved, cross your fingers, and we go to put this thing out to bid, we go to buy these projects, we go to buy this terracotta tile 4 years from now, and it's 80% or it's 20% less. What do we do with that extra money? Say we 4 years from now, 3 years from now, we go to build this, we might be in a recession, so maybe the cost of construction might go down.
Well, the reality is you're gonna start buying this a year from now. Okay, you might not need the terracotta for a couple of years from now, but your CM, remember, your CM's on board, and they're gonna lock in a guaranteed maximum price X amount of time after the drawings are done.
Okay, all right, so it's only a year, it's only a year. But let's say that the number was 152, you're saying. Let's say it comes in at 142.
Yep.
What do you do with the $10 million?
If it goes right back to the MSBA. So if it comes right off of the guarantee.
They get their 50 and what do you dial
You
this
just
thing
don't spend
backwards?
it. Yeah, you just, right. So they reduce their grant.
Their eligible cost by 50%.
Right.
So someone has to, once you spend money, you have to go back and kind of refigure this thing back into this number?
No, the only time the number gets really reset is when you agree.
I'm not asking reset, but you've got $10 million extra.
Yep.
At the end of the done, you moved into the building. How do you decide who gets that $10 million? North Andover did it years ago. They built 2 turf fields.
USDA would take back their percentage of the bid savings.
That's what you have to dial. You have to go back and do that thing in reverse.
Well, that becomes a question for the district. So you're going to vote the 100, right now, the 152 million. If at the end of the day, there's $10 million left at the end, what you do with it, it's your money. The MSBA has done. The MSBA is going to send you checks based on what you submit based upon this 3011. When they're done, what you have left is what you have left.
So sometimes you borrow it in phases, so you don't borrow that last chunk until you see the last bills and you know what you're actually borrowing. So you wouldn't borrow that money, we wouldn't expend it.
So what we'll do is, once part of the SD is, we'll take our first crack at a cash flow to kind of show the districts, the member towns, when that hit's gonna come. You know, obviously construction's a bell curve and a lot of times, and you know, you have to say in the vote that you're gonna borrow it all, but the reality of the cash flow, how you handle that, each town individually, you know, that's up to you.
So we remember North Andover, right? Do you remember that? At the end of when they built their new high school.
Yeah, they came in 3 months early and had $8 million left over, and they created probably, there's colleges that don't have the athletic fields that North Andover High School has.
So could we buy our lights with that if we wanted to?
when you're done and the project is closed, that's a totally,
Who decides that? This committee?
The towns,
Towns would put up the money.
yeah. They may want it, they may want their
It's a
cash
little-
back,
where
they may
it's a
say,
district,
spend it
you- I
on
mean,
this
that
and give us the
becomes
rest
a-
back.
Lower the tax rate.
Who knows, they'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
My guess is there'll never be anything left, yeah.
All right,
Too
so
tight
we
into
have
this.
one more quick thing, and then
It'll be
we'll adjourn.
vaporized.
So thank you, we're almost at 2 hours. But really, it's just next steps, so we just want to hit on next steps, and then we'll get you all out of here.
Let's see.
Okay.
So we have a couple of critical dates upcoming. On January 14th, our SD set goes into the cost estimators. They need a couple of weeks to turn that around. What's not up here is that the CM and the designer's cost estimator will be reconciling those two estimates on February 4th. We notify the MSBA of how that reconciliation went on February 5th, and then we'll be back in front of you guys with what we would call a final draft of the SD costs. The only thing that's left to finalize at that point is the project scope and budget conference with the MSBA, where they're at the table working to reconcile the final cost. But we'll share the cost that we have with you on that date, and that's the date that we're going to be asking for folks to authorize the SD submission. So we're going to bring you both the final number and ask you to authorize the submission on the same day.
Just to be clear, you're gonna know what the number is, but you're not voting on the number. You're voting on allowing the OPM to submit. Voting on the number is a district and town decision, and that happens after the MSBA approves the project and asks you to go ahead. So you don't approve a number per se until after the vote, town meeting and then ballot. But you will have an idea of what that number is. Of course, we want you to know what we're saying it is when it goes in. They won't add cost to it. They'll tweak the eligibility at that point. But we will at that point have all of the input for that first column for you.
So we're meeting on the 12th?
Yes. That'll be a meeting of this committee plus the school committee, because you will vote and then the school committee will ratify that vote.
And then we officially submit the package on February 20th. Correct. About a week later. Any questions about that?
Thank you for your time. Motion to adjourn?
So one second.
All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much. Have a good night.